All right. Hello, good evening, and welcome everyone to the February meeting of ANC3C's Planning, Zoning, Housing, and Economic Development Committee. We do have a very packed agenda today, so we would like to get started with our first item, which is a BZA application for 3609 35th Street Northwest to construct a rear deck to an existing attached 3-story principal dwelling in the R2 zone. And Mr. Ireland, I see you on here. Will you be presenting something?
I can speak to the project. Can you hear me actually?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh yeah, I can speak to the project. I don't have it on the computer right now. Would you prefer that I do that if I can?
If you can very, very briefly, like in 1 to 2 minutes, speak to the project. And it's my understanding that BZA staff and your neighbors have recommended approval for this project, correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I have approval from both of my neighbors on each side. I'm the middle house of a 3 unit townhome, and they've signed a document saying that they're okay with the project. The DC Office of Historic Preservation is also approved of my project. And yes, I'm trying to build a deck on the back of my house. It is going to be 8 feet and 8 feet and 3 inches deep, and it stays within the 20-foot setback of the alley and maintains under 50% of lot occupancy. I'm happy to answer any questions about the project. It's really quite straightforward. It's a small deck.
Great. I don't have any questions. I see Rick Nash, this is in your SMD, so I'll turn it over to you if you've heard anything else.
Sure. And I appreciate that Mr. Ireland, who is the homeowner, is presenting this himself this evening. It seems to be a fairly straightforward proposal. But since we don't have the plans up, I would just let everyone on the call know that since we're not taking decisions at this meeting, if anyone needs an opportunity to refresh themselves on what the application is, the link is on the meeting website, so you can refer to it there. And Mr. Ireland, before the ANC meeting, it would be good if you could send to us the email from HPRB on the desk approval. And I did see in the file the 2 letters from your neighbors on the north and south, raising no objection to this, which is great. I don't know whether BZA requires you to talk to the neighbor directly across the alley, and note that it doesn't impinge on the alley.
Right.
But in our experience, it is good to do that just so all the neighbors are apprised and might face for fewer surprises later.
Sure. I based my application off another successful application, and they didn't get the people across the alley's need for approval. But I've spoken to my neighbor behind me on the neighbor, and she's actually offered to provide written approval as well. But I said it wouldn't be necessary. Now, if you all feel that it would be necessary, I could have her sign a similar statement as well.
I think it never hurts, but if you can represent, if the question comes up at the BZA that you've spoken to the alley neighbor across the way, I think that's always helpful.
Okay, I will do that. Yes.
Great. Anybody else? All right. Thank you for your time. And
I just have a question. Do I attend the ANC meeting now?
As well, Commissioner or Rick, if you want to speak to this, but typically
Sure.
put this on consent if there's no objections from anybody else.
Right. We'll confer between now and the meeting, but I think our intention is to put this on the consent calendar, which would mean it would not come up under regular business, and so you would not have to present or speak to it.
Oh, okay. So I should take that I'm assuming you will let me know if you support the project and I can go forward with that.
Yeah, we'll let you know if it's on the consent calendar, but our assumption is it will be.
Okay, thank you very much for your time.
Sure.
Yeah. And then we would have the approved resolution signed after our February 18th meeting.
19th.
Sorry, what day?
20th, sorry.
All right.
Swally's
20th.
right.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's been a day.
Okay, and Mr. Ireland, this is still scheduled to go before the BZA later this month, is that right?
It's March 20th, actually.
Okay. Okay.
So you'll have it well in advance of that. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.
You too.
Or you can hang out.
Thank you.
All right, so next up on our agenda is an update on the Wardman redevelopment from Carmel Partners. So Adam, if you want to introduce your guest, since this is your SMD, and then let us know who needs presenting powers and we can elevate.
Sure, we have Ronnie and Matthew from Carmel. I don't know if they have a presentation, but we can make them co-hosts if they need. Do I have to ask them? No.
Hello.
Hi, do you need to be made co-host?
I don't think so. If you can see and hear me, then I think we're
Yep.
good. We don't have anything to share on the screen, only because the design is entirely unchanged from what people have seen at the Historic Preservation Review Board. And those documents are all public on the DC HPRB website. If anyone needs a refresh on the aesthetic. No significant news to update since the last time we've been to the ANC, aside from we're fully permitted and fully under construction. We have essentially completed demo and sheeting and shoring, and for the most part, we are doing below grade structure and moving forward with concrete and excavation activities. Our business plan is the same as prior. It's about 867 rental apartments in 2 buildings. And for some more specific updates on construction activities, our leader on the site, Matt Watts, can provide some more details.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Hopefully you can hear me all right. As Ronnie said, we are, excuse me, substantially complete with demolition and the sheeting and shoring operations at this time. We're actually nearing completion of all earthwork activities, and are really starting to focus on going vertical with the concrete superstructure. For both towers, we to be working on the concrete superstructure over the coming months, with top out for A building, which is the structure on the Woodley side of the site, slated to happen late this summer, and top out of the second tower, which is the one with Calvert Street frontage, occurring at some point this fall, roughly around Thanksgiving. In addition to the concrete superstructure activities, you should start to see some of the facade elements and start to go in, call it in the mid to late spring timeframe. And site work will be ongoing as we progress construction on both of the towers. So that is where we are for now.
We're happy to answer questions if anyone has questions.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
I just want to note before we move to questions that we are aware that there is an appeal to the BZA on building permits. We have consulted with various DC government agencies and have come to the conclusion that this meeting, because we are automatically a party to said appeal, is not a place to promote said appeal. If you have questions about the project in general, we are willing to take those, but we are not allowing, we are not allowing the appeal to be mentioned in an exorbitant way here. So with that, we'll take questions.
We'll take questions first from commissioners and committee members. And this should be related to the construction and the construction progress and anything related to that. As Ronnie mentioned, the design is what it is. That was a long process, and that was publicly played out as required. So just to again reiterate what Adam has just mentioned, and keep your questions focused on construction. Thanks. All right. So I see Glenn, who is a committee member, has his hand up. Go ahead, Glenn.
I've just got a quick question. I've noticed there's some area in the park on Woodley Road that's marked off with caution tape. I was wondering if you can comment on what's going on with that.
Sure. We've had some sinkholes surfacing that are various shapes and sizes. They're not overly large. They're like between 18 and 24 inches, both wide and deep. And we're not certain what the cause is yet. We've been investigating. We know it's not related to construction only because it's been occurring since before we started construction. Before we took ownership of the site, these sinkholes started, and most of them are actually not adjacent to, or I don't think any of them are actually adjacent to the construction activities, but most of them are pretty far away, like 50 to 100 feet away from the actual activities. So we don't think the construction's causing it. We're still concerned and curious. So we marked it just for safety, and we let the schools know specifically that it was happening and they need to be careful. We're working with geotech engineers to better understand it. Matt, I don't know if you've learned anything recently. You're welcome to share it if so.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head. We've retained a geotechnical engineer to take a look at this for us. And we've also had our landscape architect take a look. Nothing conclusive, but it is something that we're attacking head on right now.
Thanks.
All right. Any other questions from commissioners or committee members? All right. Seeing none, we will open it up to the public for Q&A. All right. You can raise your virtual hand or raise your hand on the screen. I see Karen Caston has her hand up.
Sandra had her hand up first.
Oh, okay. And then Sandra, why don't you go first, and then Karen, go ahead.
Hi, hopefully this is quick. I live in the Barton next door to the construction, and the driveway that's being used by the construction project, as well as the Barton and the Woodley behind it, is getting pretty rough. And I'm wondering if there's trucks on there all day long, and there's a lot of rocks and there's some holes and things. Is that something that the construction people will monitor a little bit and maybe smooth out a little bit for those of us that are still trying to use the driveway?
Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure that that driveway is in good working order. I apologize, Sandra. I will make sure that we take a look at that first thing tomorrow. And if there's anything that we can address, that we do that right away. But we are committed to being a good neighbor. It's super important to us that we're respectful of you and your neighbors as you're coming in and out of your property.
And being sure that there's usually someone to monitor people coming and going out of there, but not all the time. And it's really hard to get out of the driveway with all the trucks parked on both sides now. So
Sure.
Again, just being aware that we are trying to use the driveway.
Yeah, no, I totally understand. I will talk to the folks that are in charge of monitoring traffic there and see if there's anything that we can do to improve our operations. Conversely, is there any type of mirror or anything that we could install to increase visibility? Or is this truly a traffic control issue that we need to actively manage?
Well, there's just, because you have the trucks parked in the center of Calvert that are waiting to come in and out, and then you have trucks parked on both sides of the driveway for parking and for people that are working, it's just really hard to see to get out of there.
Understood. We'll talk with the flaggers that are down there maintaining traffic and do everything in our power to improve the situation.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate your time.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you. All right, Karen.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Before Carmel bought the site, there was a way for pedestrians to walk through the site without having to walk all the way around the block. And I know Carmel included a pedestrian path in the site plans that it sent to DDOT, Department of Transportation. I'd like to know whether the pedestrian path, access path through the site is part of your final plans for this site.
Ronnie, because this is a design related question and we wanted to focus on construction, I'll let you decide to answer this or not, or just refer to what your previous plans were.
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking, but any plans we've submitted represent our intentions of what we're going to build.
My understanding was that you submitted some plans initially to DDOT and then to the Department of Buildings, which is overseeing or has overseen the final plans for this site. And so I'm asking if your final plans for this site include a permanent pedestrian access path through the site. You know,
I honestly I don't recall submitting any pedestrian path through the site.
okay, well, I've seen it. In other words, DDOT sent me what you submitted.
Then that's what we're building. If DDOT has it, that's what we're building.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I just make a general comment
leave it at
before
that.
we
But go ahead.
proceed?
I want to just before you go, Adam, I want to make something clear. Nothing is permanent in the world ever.
Well, as permanent as your buildings. That's
Yes,
that's
it
what
will
I'm
be
saying.
exactly as permanent as what we're building.
My only comment is that this is private property. This isn't public property. Just like there isn't a pedestrian access for people to cut across my building's property, Carmel doesn't have to build one if they don't want to build one. Just like there isn't a public pedestrian access through your building, Karen.
Adam,
I understand.
Okay, we're not going to do that.
DDOT required it.
Okay,
Not doing it
thank you.
DDOT
Okay. Any other questions? You can raise your virtual hand too. That is in the reactions button. I'm not seeing any. Okay. Ms. White. I see your hand is up. If you want to go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to find out if the delivery schedule is still on time. When will the units be delivered?
Short answer, yes. Mr. Watts, you're welcome to elaborate.
Yes, first units are slated to be delivered in the summer of 25. And last units or final completion of the project should be occurring between Q1 and Q2 of 26.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you. All right. Anyone else? A last call, if you will. All right. Again, appreciate you're taking the time this evening to brief us on this and answer some questions. and appreciate your responsiveness to some of the concerns that are brought up whenever y'all are made aware of them, and how you go about fixing what you can as fast as possible. Really appreciate that.
We're doing our best.
Yeah, we want to be a good neighbor.
Thank you. Thank you. Cool. With that, you can
Good
stick around or have a good evening.
Thank you, Ronnie and Matt.
All right. Up next, we have an update on the Cleveland Park.
Commissioner Pagas, do you
Yeah.
just want to mention that we'll be passing?
Oh, so at our next meeting, we will be formally going through the potential discussion and passing of a resolution to let the zoning commission know that we will be fully participating as a party with our automatic party status in the BZA case. And we will be also asking that the Department of Buildings not put a stop work order on the building permits while the case is being adjudicated through that group. So that will be on the agenda at our next meeting. So with that, we'll now move on to the update on the Cleveland Park Promenade and Sidewalk Cafe plan from Kimberly at DDOT. And welcome and thank you for coming. We will make you a co-host if we have not already, so that you'd be able to share anything that you have.
Looks like I have that capability.
Spectacular. And Tammy, did you have anything else you wanted to add before?
No, I just want to introduce everybody to Kimberly Vaca. She's been being such a great partner to us, briefing us along the way of all of the plans and how DDOT is looking at using the space. So I think like when I've talked to neighbors and sort of told them what's coming today, I'm like, I want you to be both excited about it and, you know, ask all of your questions today. So with that, I will turn it over to Kimberly.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. My name is Kimberly Vaca. I am a transportation planner here at DDOT. I am here to talk about the Cleveland Park service lane, but from a public space activation standpoint. So I know there's a long history of this lane being redesigned recently under construction. I am not a part of that project. I'm here to focus on a very particular part of that, but I believe Christian Pinheiro or someone from our community engagement team is here, as well as a staff member from IPMA who is the division who did the construction project. So I can also write any questions down and forward it to the respective team, but I'm not here to talk about the design. So just jumping in, I am the public space activation coordinator. So what does that mean? Essentially, I'm all the fun things that DDOT does that a lot of people don't realize the transportation agency does in the city. So from streeteries to sidewalk cafes, to the Arts in the Right-of-Way program that we started 3 years ago, Parking Day, which is an annual event, block parties, and then open streets, which we brought to Ward 3 2 years ago for the first time. So if you have any interest in those, feel free to reach out to me. I put a QR code on the screen as well as our website that talks about these various programs, but we're doing a lot of exciting stuff at DDOT, and it's my favorite part of the job. So diving into this location, to the service lane, there is some background that I want to touch upon, just make sure we're all on the same page, right? So there is the streetscape and drainage improvement project that DDOT led, going back a number of years, implemented by IPMA, which is a specific division within the agency. That project sought to improve drainage, pedestrian safety, green infrastructure projects, and then should be completed in March of this year. So very, very soon. In anticipation of that, I'm here to talk about, well, what happens once this project is done? What can you all as the community and the businesses expect to see and be able to facilitate in that space? So just some brief highlights, many upgrades were made, but some 3 things to note was that the grade of the service lane was raised to align with the sidewalk. So now it's all one flat surface. For the most part, they installed street trees, tree boxes, bike racks, and trash cans. So there's a lot of new public amenities in that space. And then towards the very end of the project, DDOT announced that we're closing that space permanently to cars, meaning that before it functioned largely for circulation, for access, for parking, all of that has been removed, and we're now finishing up the final pieces of removing vehicle access from that space. So before, this picture was taken in 2018, you could see, ultimately this space was largely dedicated to vehicles.
Really? We can't
Yes.
screen. Sorry.
I'm so
I thought you
sorry.
were speaking into just such a vivid imagination here.
Wow. Okay. Let me see if I can do that.
Doing such a
Okay.
great job. I saw
Thank
everything
you.
that you were talking about.
I have so many visuals to go along with this. I actually cannot share. So I have the buttons, but it won't let me. It says it's disabled.
Let me see.
If we need to hack it, you can email it to me and I can do it.
Okay.
It's weird because nobody else is sharing and it just says one participant can share at a time. Do you want to send it to Tammy real quick?
Yeah, let's do.
Sorry.
Apologies, everybody.
Commissioner Paggett's on my end, it's not showing her as a co-host.
Oh, hold on.
That could be the easier solution.
All right, let's see if it works now.
Oh, yeah.
Duh.
Okay. Aha, it does. Okay.
Wonderful.
Okay. Let's jump right back in here again. Oh, I have to share. Okay. Okay. This is different than Teams, everyone, so apologies.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Okay. So I don't know. You're seeing like not the presentation view though, right? Which is fine. I can just make it really
No,
big.
this is fine. We can-
Okay. Okay, we'll do this then. Okay, so that's who I am. That's the background. And then here's where we ended up.
Okay, great.
So as you can see, and I did animations, but that's fine. So you can see the before, right? This is largely space for vehicles for both circulation, parking, and there were no sidewalk cafes permitted in this space because there simply wasn't enough room on the sidewalk. We require 10 feet is our standard, but we have allowed down to 6 in some circumstances, like on more smaller residential streets for sidewalk cafes. But you couldn't even fit that in this scenario. So this is how it functioned. Then in the interim, in 2020, we began our streetery program, which allowed food establishments to temporarily expand outdoor dining into parking lanes, travel lanes, and alleys. So you'll see this is just one visual of a streetery, as we would call them, in the parking and travel lane of service lane. That is a temporary program that still exists to this day. But then during construction, all of that was removed. Now, where we're at now, so same visual as before, except it functions very differently, especially with the cars being removed. So the big changes here, as mentioned, everything's at grade. There's no vehicle access, and essentially this space now functions as a sidewalk, right? It's purely meant for the movement of people. So you can see various dimensions that I highlighted here. You have anywhere between 5 to 9 feet in the space closest to the buildings, facades. There's a 10-foot clear pedestrian pathway down the middle of the service lane. And then towards the curb, you have a 6-foot space that was going to be potentially where vehicles could be parked, but now that we're no longer accessing that or allowing that, it's just additional space for people. And you can see from how the space was designed with the various materials, there's real clear delineation between the spaces. And even in the space farther to the right on the screen, there are bollards there, which will not be removed as part of this project. So with this all in mind, right, my job is to come in and say, under the existing conditions, how then can we activate this space? And so working with the engineers, working internally with all the various divisions, we came up with a plan for our outdoor dining programs. Now, given that this is a sidewalk, it's no longer a travel lane, it's no longer a parking lane, it's not an alley. This area will be processed as a sidewalk cafe. So you can see just like a very rough conceptual design at the top where we're proposing to allow food establishments to expand dining within the space immediately adjacent to their business. So you can see here in the street view in the orange space here, and then also in the space that was previously going to be used for vehicle parking. So in the middle, this really allows for all users to benefit, businesses to benefit from expanding outdoor dining in various components of the space, residents and visitors to have a clear area without wayfinding or winding through different projections or paths or tree boxes or anything like that. It's just straight across the whole service lane. So it maximizes the space for outdoor dining and maximizes the space for pedestrians. So this is conceptual, and then every business, as per any food establishment, would need to go through the standard process for a sidewalk cafe permit. So how are those regulated? I'll just briefly talk about, we allow for both unenclosed and enclosed sidewalk cafes in public space. They're regulated through our municipal code. Applicants apply through TOPS, which is our online permitting system for a public space permit. That then takes 2 to 3 months to process, gets sent to the ANC for review, and then final approval by the Public Space Committee. So that is a public process. Anyone can go and attend and send their comments. And then if they want to serve alcohol or build any sort of structural component like an awning or canopy, then there's further approvals by APCA or DOB, and then fees as well. So we have all sorts of design requirements. Essentially, restaurants are only able to occupy the space and within their building property extended. So they cannot occupy the space adjacent to them in either direction. It's only the space in front. And then they have to provide, again, that clear pedestrian pathway that we talked about. They have buffers from street intersections or bus stops. That's not really applicable here. They can have barriers up to 36 inches or 3 feet. We see a lot of planters or some tactical fencing, but we allow a variety of different types. And then also, yeah, it's just like general design requirements. So I brought a conceptual example of what a sidewalk cafe could be allowed for a restaurant in the service lane. So you can see here, I just went out, took a picture of service lane. You have Sababa on the right. Their business width is roughly 25 feet. So they could occupy the space adjacent to their restaurant without blocking the entrance, right? We don't want you to, it's a fire code issue. So in the space that's not blocking their entrance, it would roughly allow for 6 seats. And then there's the 10-foot pedestrian pathway. And then over here in the area closer to the curb, that would roughly allow for about 10 more seats. So Sababa could apply for a permit to allow up to 16 seats in a sidewalk cafe. They could apply for 1 space, both spaces, either or. It's up to their discretion what they would like to do. So you can see, really this allows for clear visual of people walking down the middle of the service lane with any activities happening off to the sides. And that's it. It's pretty simple. I figured I'd be here mostly answering any questions. My contact information is included on this slide. Feel free to call or email me anytime if you have a question about this location or any other in the district.
Great, thank you. So we will first take questions from commissioners and then move to public. So I think, and if you want, you can keep the visual up of like what it looks like laid out there. I know I have gotten a ton of questions, not a ton, a handful of questions, but they're almost all the same. So if you don't mind, I'll kind of ask some that probably preempt some that others are coming with. So the main thing I think I've heard from people is like, and I know you're not like the design of the space or whatever, but why are the bollards still there? Like, why couldn't the bollards be removed and then do like a straight like pathway for walking and the straight sort of pathway for the restaurants?
Right.
I don't know if that's something you're able to address.
Yeah, so without getting into specifics, because again,
Yeah.
not an engineer, not a designer, you know, and talking with their team, the decision to close service lane to vehicles came at pretty much the final hour of the project, right? And so the budget has mostly already been spent. They're already having to make revisions to the ends of the service lanes for safety and accessibility. And so there's just simply no budget left to go back in and remove all of the bollards along the service lane, is what I'm being told from their team.
Got it. I think there may be like more follow-ups on that ahead, but thank you for kind of just laying that thing out there. So the way that it's laid out here, I think, you know, I will tell you from the start, I'm on team as much, you know, restaurant patio space as we can get for our restaurants. I think one of the most delightful things to come out of the pandemic was, you know, the vitality of people hanging out there and dining and seeing friends and neighbors and walking by. And so I'm really excited about this. I'm really excited about the reopening. I don't want to delay anything, but I'm looking for ideas on like what gets us the most space for restaurants. And so for the most part, I think a lot of this can work. What I'm concerned about, and I think, you know, I keep calling it sort of like, it's like the Nanny O'Brien's rule, right? Like, so Nanny O'Brien's was like one of the most vibrant places throughout the pandemic that really like housed our community when we couldn't eat inside. And, you know, they didn't even really have that huge of a footprint out there. They had like 2 picnic tables. But it like with this design, because of where they're situated and where the metro rates are, it's really like penalizing them. And so I just wonder if there are any other options for ones like that that could potentially allow for left or right movement if the businesses on the left or right aren't using it, and they're fine with it.
Yeah, unfortunately, and I even went to our attorneys to confirm this because I wanted to be absolutely sure. The code does not allow for sidewalk cafes to expand beyond their property lines. So that's written into regulation. It is not something that the Public Space Committee has discretion over. So you have discretion on a lot of design, right? The materials used and things like that. But the footprint of the cafes is not one of those things. Now, a lot of changes are happening to Connecticut Avenue. And as part of the multimodal safety improvement project, if parking stays along the this area here along the curb, and those are full-time parking spaces, they would be eligible for a street read. So something to consider. Under the temporary program right now, you know, we could permit them temporarily and see what happens, but unfortunately not in the service lane outside of the space.
Got it.
Yeah.
One thing that I can't really, I'm not even fully remembering if this was solved, but I feel like wasn't an issue. I think on the right side closest to the street there was electric outlets that were installed along some of those, where some of those trees are. Is that available to restaurants to use I saw the electric part of your permitting process. Is that something that could be used by restaurants to light things? Or TBD. I don't even know if that's, I don't even know if we ever figured out if any of those work.
I don't know. I think Cassandra, you're speaking, but
we'll circle.
Yeah, no, we're doing committee members and commissioners right now.
Well,
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. We'll circle back around. Okay, I think that's like most of my questions, and so I'm going to turn it over to Commissioner Nash.
Thanks very much, Commissioner Gordon. I wanted to follow up on one of your points, and then I have another question for Ms. Vaca. So, you know, if we have a business that, again, because of the location of metro grates, might not have the full sidewalk cafe expansion potential of others, you mentioned the regulations don't permit that. So would that be a question of changing the regulation, or would it require changing the statute? Do you know?
Yeah, we would need to change code. So, I mean, potentially you all could petition council to, you know, adopt new legislation to change the code. I know right now I am drafting regulations to adopt new codes for streeteries, and that's been taking me 3 years. So I would say that, you know, it takes some time. Council can move more
Sure.
swiftly than we
No,
can.
I understand
So,
that.
but yes,
that would
the
seem to
code
be
would
a,
need to change.
yeah, thanks. I mean, that would seem to be a promising endeavor for, us to consider and maybe support, and for the council member to do too, because, aside from maybe solving, perhaps not immediately, but hopefully soon, the issue of the one business, I mean, it does allow other businesses flexibility now, if they're to expand left or right, not be occupied by a restaurant, it would need their consent, and I suppose it would still be under the caps and so forth that exist,
Right.
related to restrooms and other infrastructure in the restaurant, but that would seem to be a good thing that would give flexibility. My other question has to do with maintenance and responsibility for this promenade strip. There's been some discussion in the community about who is responsible for whether it's snow removal or litter pickup. I mean, looking at DC code, it seems that businesses are responsible, actually any property owner, only for the first 3 feet of sidewalk adjacent. And this is a very wide sidewalk with maybe currently the designated pedestrian travel portion in the middle. So, who will be responsible for clearing snow and for other maintenance?
Are my colleagues from DDOT on the call? I can't see the people, so just want to check in.
No, Christian wasn't here, but he told me he thought other people were coming.
And just maybe a related
Okay.
thing to that is if portions of the sidewalk are given over to sidewalk cafes, a condition in the lease that then that additional obligation would be,
Sure.
that.
Yeah, I will look into this and flag this as a question. I know generally speaking, businesses are responsible for the sidewalk adjacent to their properties, and then with sidewalk cafes, they are responsible for the maintenance of their cafe. So I think outside of this issue, if they were to operate in public space, those chairs, those tables, those planters, whatever they put there, is their responsibility to keep it clean and maintained. But I am not sure about the service lane maintenance, so I've noted that.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, just to be clear, like the planters and the stuff, the litter bins that are part of the project that DDOT put out there are not their responsibility.
I'm talking about for their cafe. So
their
yeah,
cafe. I just wanted to be clear that there's a delineation there.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. I think Bob, you're up next.
Sorry, I didn't know if we were doing commissioners first.
Oh.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well,
Bob.
commissioners and our committee members.
Sure. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, thank you. Do you have, was there an estimate on what the cost would be to remove the bollards?
I don't know.
Do you know who to contact for the information about to get an estimate on what the cost, when they denied it, like who denied it? They obviously must have had numbers to say we don't have budget for this. Do you know who that is?
Yeah, I can put in the chat the 2 staff members that are working on the project. It's Dawit and Zara with IPMA, so I'll make sure to share their contact information.
Thank you.
No problem.
My other question is, can you explain why dividing this current configuration like down the middle, as was suggested by someone else, is not feasible? Like having the pedestrian walkway be the area from the place of business to sort of that mid-seam up the middle of the old, driveway in the purple area, and then have the cafe permitted space to the right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so for our clear pedestrian pathways, that means that they cannot have obstructions within them, whether it be a tree box, a bus stop, bike racks, whatever. We want the dedicated space for people to not need to meander around infrastructure. And that's largely due to assist our more vulnerable users to navigate the space, right? If they have to weave around infrastructure, it makes it challenging to traverse that pathway. And so the bollards that are there, you know, I think we would be working under different assumptions if we had a different design for the service lane, but given that the bollards currently exist, right? I am working within the conditions that we have available to us. That creates a challenge for that sort of arrangement. We did look at that, and the orange area adjacent to the business over here on the left-hand side is not wide enough to meet our even minimum dimensions. It's only 5 feet in a lot of areas where there's building projections, so it's just not sufficient.
But it was acceptable before to be the only pedestrian access point.
So we didn't have cafes before, right? So cafes are required to have at least 6 feet for a pedestrian pathway. At minimum, our standard is 10. So before, right, the sidewalk for ADA access, it's only 4 feet, was 3, now it's 4. But I'm not talking necessarily about ADA access specifically. This is our standard for sidewalk cafe widths.
And you said there's a flexibility there from 6 to 10 feet?
So yes, the Public Space Committee has the discretion to reduce that pedestrian width down to 6 feet. We don't see that though at areas of high pedestrian traffic, like this location. Those are really for maybe more local one-off neighborhood cafes that are on side streets that don't have the type of pedestrian activity you see here. So our office would be recommending 10 feet for the clear pedestrian pathway, which is our general standard for cafes.
Have you actually seen the front of the businesses in the area closest to the storefronts? I mean, it's not level. I mean, it would be really hard to put tables out there. There's a pitch to the pavement. They rise up.
Yeah, and so businesses are allowed to put platforms to help address any grade issues in that space.
Yeah. I think that's all the questions I had.
Thank you.
I think Glenn was up next.
Thank you.
Sorry, I was on mute. I was saying Glenn.
Hey, okay, so theoretically, if this were reclassed from being a sidewalk to being a pedestrian street, would that change the rules?
We don't have like that sort of designation necessarily. So it's either like, are you saying like a Wooner for something like that? Like maybe what you would see down at the wharf?
You can call it that, but it seems like by calling this a sidewalk, we've kind of put ourselves in a box that we're basically, that some of the businesses are not allowed to have, or that they're unable to take advantage of the same things that they would be able to take advantage of if it were considered a street and they could do the adjacent business or the adjacent space problem. Because we're calling it a sidewalk and we're playing under the rules of the sidewalk cafes. What I'm saying is, what if we reclass this as a pedestrian street?
There's like not really a mechanism that I'm aware of to do that. I see what you're saying. Like, right, there's advantages to being in the streetery program, but this isn't a parking lane or a travel lane, right? This is not, this doesn't function as that anymore. So it'd be hard to justify it as such.
I guess what I'm wondering is there any way to get the rules that are more flexible to apply in this situation?
No.
Okay. Commissioner Siddiqui.
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. I really appreciate all your work and everything you're doing. And I guess what you're hearing from all of us is a lot of frustration, right? Because a lot of people here advocated for this, and now that we have it, it seems like this is not gonna provide all the amenities that we did want, right? And I'm reiterating Commissioner Gordon's point, not to kind of say it again and again, but to be like, if there's some way that you can help us figure out how to modify this, I think it'd be helpful. And I think one of the things to add is the most popular places during the pandemic were ones where you had like enclosed space to sit inside during any weather, let rain or anything else, right?
Mhm.
The medium rare pergola, for example, right across on the other side, that allows like enclosed space. It's incredibly popular. I've seen people sitting there no matter what weather is going on. And it actually gives our community a sense of like really nice feel. It feels like you're part of the city as opposed to like stuff not being there. So if there's any way we can increase the space, and I guess I'll ask one more, but I guess this one might be rejected too, is like perhaps the sidewalk cafes are not next to the restaurants. Perhaps they're like across, right? I know Glenn's asked like like for example, like on the right half of the photo that you're showing here, what if we could designate all that purple space, right? And then you could just have, or sorry, or the opposite side, I meant. Like you could have the purple part all on the far side next to the cars, and then the part closest, yeah, and then the left side would just be all sidewalk cafes. And I know the restaurants would have to contend with bollards and things like that, but that at least gives them that space to play with.
Yeah, and the issue with that is that this space also, and conceptually you can see it here, but it is not, again, similar to this pathway, which is straight. It weaves, right? It was parking. So they had built, there's vaults at one point, which is where Nanny O'Brien's is. There are planters, there are other obstacles that's hard to see in this picture here, but that make that design a bit challenging. So you can see here as a clearer example, right? If we're walking in this space, you then end up at a planter box. So it is a puzzle, right? Of unfortunately, as the project progressed, the use of this space changed. And so the design that is here is not really allowing for, I think, the uses maybe that you all are trying to expand on, right? It functions best with the pedestrians in the center, with the clear space, and then the areas off to the side, closest to the business in here for the extra activities, right? At first and foremost, this needs to be a space for people to move. That's the number one priority in our eyes, right? Of getting people through and to these businesses. So that's,
I mean, okay, I guess I'll just push back a little bit on that because clearly allowing cars in here somehow decreases the amount of space that we want people to move in, right? Like that's the part I think that's difficult for me to understand is like, and maybe that's what Glenn was trying to get at is like just reclassify this, like, drive a car through it one day a week and then suddenly it's a thing. Like we can find someone with a 4-wheel drive that can go up and down the things. And then that way, or like park a car in there permanently. Like I'm sure we can raise a fund for like parking a $2,000 car in there. And then suddenly we have, sidewalk cafes and more space for pedestrians and everything's okay. So I guess that's the part that like is really like frustrating us. And we really, really want to understand like the host
okay.
of things that we do to
So
get over it.
let me clarify something here that I didn't talk into, which is the streetery guidelines. So if this is classified as a travel lane, then you'll need to provide at minimum a 14-foot fire lane that is accessible for fire access at all times, which is wider than the 10-foot sidewalk cafe clear pedestrian pathway that I'm advocating for. And the 14 feet is a minimum. The standard is 20 feet for a fire lane. So that pretty much takes up this entire service lane if we were to look at its standard of 20 feet. I could see the FEM's fire and emergency management going down to 14 here, but that then leaves you with a much smaller space for a streetery, right? And that would need to be not against the business, but against the curb. So then it's even further away from the business than the current arrangement. So I want to kind of remove this idea that streeteries would be more beneficial. While they do allow you to expand in front of adjacent businesses, The other design criteria of streeteries would create more limitations for what's happening.
Okay. And I guess my final question is, when this was closed before during the pandemic, how
Mhm.
come we had more chances for more space and now we don't? Like, were we breaking code at that time?
Yes.
Or did that code not exist?
Yes. So the structures and tents that were out there during the pandemic were not to the requirements. And if under the permanent program, as we're now gearing towards, what was previously out there would not be able to be put back.
I'll let someone else ask questions on, because I know there are a lot of hands up, but I just want to make sure I have a list of stuff we can do. So request funding from council to remove the bollards. That's one thing we can do.
Yes.
There is Commissioner Nash's suggestion of work on changing the code. I know it takes 3 years, but that's still something we can do.
It could be faster for you all. And I hope it would be. Yeah.
And then I guess the third thing that I think I heard you say was they could apply for a streetery where the cars are right now parked, right? So we could do that?
Yes.
Okay. I feel like, and that third one, how hard would that be? Because I know Connecticut Avenue right now is 3 lanes, but I know like up on closer to the sort of Nebraska Avenue area, there is like place where some restaurants take up streetery space.
Yeah, so food establishments are able to apply for metered parking spaces for streeteries. Streeteries are right now under the temporary program, which is set to expire at the end of this year, are basically administrative. So they don't go to the public space committee like sidewalk cafes do at this point in time in its temporary program, and they are free. So it's pretty painless. You do not need a signed and stamped plan. You can, they're very flexible as to the drawings that we look at this point under the temporary program. But I'm here and I can help with the businesses seeking to go through that effort.
Are you sure that that nannies would be allowed in front of their location to apply for one, or no?
I do not know the current
perfect.
condition at this point. I just generally speaking, if there is a parking space there, it could potentially be eligible for a streetery. So happy to follow up with the stakeholders who are interested in that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for answering.
Yeah.
Commissioner Pagets.
Cool. Thank you again for your patience here in answering these questions. There's still that Metro Vault in front of nannies that might, but maybe you can go to the right or the left of that if they want to go after the streetery. So first question I have is, are spots that aren't food establishments able to apply in the public space committee for use of the space outside of their establishment to like put tables and chairs? Like, for example, at All Fired Up, if they protect the sidewalk with some sort of, paper covering or what not to make sure it's not painted, like, would they be able to get a permit to put tables out there?
So only food
one example, and like if like Femme Fatale can put merch out front if they want to lure people in.
Yeah, so to have a sidewalk cafe, you need to be a food establishment. That food establishment's pretty broad, like grocery stores would apply. We even have theaters are actually eligible to be a food establishment. For the most part, though, restaurants, breweries, distilleries, anyone who sells food and is classified as a food establishment. Now, there are other public space regulations that allow for businesses. They have like the first 3 to 4 feet, I believe, of the sidewalk can be dedicated towards displaying of goods. I think it's 3.
So they can do this anyway.
Yes, and that's without a permit.
Oh, fantastic. That is super helpful. And they could have like, some tables set up and just bring them in at night, right?
So it's the display of goods that is eligible. I can follow up with a specific code so everyone knows exactly what's permissible. But generally speaking, like for places who put out little bookshelves, right, a bookstore that's displaying their books, right, that's permissible. But I don't believe tables and chairs are necessarily allowable. Now, if you wanted to install a bench, we do allow public space permits to approve fixtures in public space. So you could apply for a bench and maybe some other sort of fixture in that space.
Like a table?
Well, I mean, like by
Yeah.
the levels, yeah.
I don't believe I have ever seen anyone do that, so I think it'd be a new thing for us to review, but
Hey,
definitely seating.
cool.
Might as well try and
We
see what
being
happens.
trailblazing
Yeah.
We're all about it.
We tell them our plans, they'll reject them beforehand.
Yeah.
And then another question is, if they put up like umbrellas and stuff with that's not enclosed, but that would still be like covered outdoor seating, right?
Right, that's not an enclosed space. So I'm gonna go back to a different slide that I had here. So an enclosed sidewalk cafe is something that's completely enclosed. It's only allowed to be enclosed for certain months of the year from October to May. So it cannot be basically building out your business into the public space. It has to be removable. So you'll see here, there's different, this is like some sort of tarp material that's see-through and transparent. And there's all sorts of different designs. This is not the only type of material or design that we would approve, but umbrellas do not fall under that category.
Okay. And then there is also still I don't want to traumatize my fellow commissioners further with the use of this word, awning options.
Yes.
If they're extending that off their building, and if they put up sides on that in that like smaller space, is that enclosed or unenclosed?
If they have an awning, like the red portion seen here, let's use it as an example, without focusing on the white, that is still an unenclosed sidewalk cafe. It's
Gotcha.
when you put the sides on that it becomes enclosed.
Okay.
So you could, in the spaces adjacent to the business, have an awning, have a canopy, expand it over the area in that space to make it more attractive or, feel more privatized for the cafe.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And I'll let somebody else go because I have your email and bother you frequently. I think Glenn and Bob still have follow-ups who are on the committee.
I see. Glenn, you can go.
Thanks. I'm trying to be in a solution-oriented mode here, and I'm hoping that you can join me on this endeavor. Thinking about, okay, if we're in the sidewalk cafe world of regulation, would it be possible for a business that where they themselves are not a food provider or a food establishment to sublease their sidewalk space to a neighbor who was a food provider?
Good question.
You're saying like if they had installed tables and chairs and then they sublease it out?
Exactly. To their neighbor.
So as mentioned, I don't think we would approve tables. I've never seen that. I don't know. Maybe that happens. Once the other distinction I think that would need to be made is if it is approved for just tables and chairs, it cannot be privatized. So many food establishments who have a cafe, that's privatizing public space, meaning that they can remove people from that space if they're not dining at their establishment versus a public space, which is anyone can sit and eat there. So I think that also is a distinction that would need to be made. I do not know if they can lease out public space because it's not theirs to lease.
Okay, so
right, it's still public.
What if they lease the right to put tables in front of their space?
They are applying to occupy the space with tables and chairs. So they're putting in a construction piece. They're not.
I mean, that's not a construction piece. That's like setting out tables and chairs, right? It's like putting out a picnic table or putting out chairs for a sidewalk cafe is what I think we were talking about.
So these are more temporary fixtures rather than, let's say.
Right. Okay, look, I'm going back to the idea of, and the fundamental problem that I'm hoping that maybe you can help us find a solution for, where we've got some businesses that because of the configuration are not allowed, like don't have access to the additional space on the other side of the street. Specifically, we're talking about Nanny O'Brien's.
You're right.
That during the pandemic, first of all, they did just go over the vaults, but secondly, they have cooperative neighbors that maybe they would be able to use the space on either side. They're not allowed to use that space with the under the current regulations because they're only allowed like what's directly in front of them. Is there an opportunity to allow their neighbors to access the space and hand that right to access the space to Nanny O'Brien's?
So I don't think so, because I really don't think so. I mean,
So
I don't know. Maybe we can try and figure it out, but like
maybe you can say it's okay to maybe say, I don't know. I don't know how.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never seen that done.
Think about, and maybe try to work with us on making something work, rather than just informing us on how what we're trying to come up with is just wrong. Or just impossible. It would be really helpful to be to kind of work with us here and help us get to a yes.
Right. And listen, as the person who administers the streetery program and outdoor dining, I am an avid user of restaurants, and this is something that I'm passionate about and also want to see being successful, right? But I'm also trying to set the expectation up front about what's legally possible and permissible and allowable under our regulations and permit process. So I want to work with you, and in my eyes, this design is the compromise. I had sat with this for many, many months and talking with various different groups, and as the designs have changed, what's permissible has changed. And I hear you, and I can hear the frustration amongst many of the committee members and commissioners, and I will look into this, but I do just want to try and let everyone know that we are working with this within a certain framework and design and infrastructure, right?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Bob?
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I understand the space from where the regulations come from, but they are somewhat absurd. That you would need a 14-foot clear space for a fire truck if this were a roadway makes no sense whatsoever, because currently the fire truck's going to be on Connecticut Avenue on the other side of the curb, and those buildings are no more in jeopardy if there's a fire, if we don't have that 14-foot clearance way. So it's nonsensical. What is the source of the regulations, and how do we change them?
For sidewalk cafes or for street?
So for the let's talk specifically about the 10-foot clear pedestrian walkway, because honestly, the 12-foot space between that median line. No, stay where you were.
Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Because the ample space between the building front and the middle of that old driveway is got to be like over 12 feet. And yes, there are bollards in between it, but I just wouldn't, look at that and say it's impassable. You've got wide spaces for people to go in two different directions. Even in wheelchairs and strollers, there's room to pass there. And so there's got to be some more flexibility in the regulation to make this work, that takes into consideration the context of our built environment.
Yeah. The flexibility that we have is down to 6 feet. And unfortunately, this space over here does not consistently allow for 6 feet.
What about the space to the left of it?
For here, yes. So in the center, yes, right? It's 10 feet in width.
So, I mean, if you had 6 feet, so if that's 10 feet, so if you added 1 foot to the left of the median line, you'd have 6 feet. Plus you'd have all the other stuff on the other side of the bollards. You'd now have 10 feet on the other side, the 6 plus the cobblestone plus the 4. And now you'd have a much bigger area for, cafe seating. I understand what you're saying, that, you can build platforms, whatever, but that space up against the building front is really not a functional space for people that businesses just aren't going to take advantage of that. And I'll let Cassandra talk to that, but there's got to be a way here to make a better use of this than to, be adamant about a clear 10-foot pathway. It's just, we can accommodate clear pedestrian movement with less than that.
So what I'm hearing is a desire for a smaller, clear pedestrian pathway.
Yeah, of that 10 feet, if you took 6 feet that you're saying is the minimum, and that would be the 6 feet closest to the buildings, right, to near the bollards, and make that your clear pedestrian pathway all the way through, but then also have, the area next to the buildings can be pedestrian pathway too. So you have, you have 6 feet clear. That leaves you with 10 or 11 feet of cafe area close to the curb.
Yeah, I like what Bob is saying, because you all said in your public space committee, you have the discretion to go to 6 feet. And if you have 6 feet on each side of the bollards, yes, that's not 10 feet of space, but it goes by your regulations to be 6 feet on each side. And you can approve it on a case-by-case basis, because you're like, really, this was 12 feet, but it's really just 6 feet on each side of the bollard. So I feel like if you all have the discretion to go to 6, that solution could work.
Right. So mapping this out.
Ooh, real time. I dig it.
I'm sorry. So we're talking about moving to 6 feet from the bollards for sidewalk cafe?
Pedestrian
So
access.
Pedestrian
So it's going to
access,
be
sorry.
pedestrian access on both sides of the bollards. So it'd be 6 feet on one side, 6 feet on the other. And then you would
Okay.
have 10 feet right over there.
Oh, okay. Sorry. I'm a little slow today.
Is this what I'm hearing?
Yes.
Okay.
This still doesn't solve for the nannies problem, which could be the streetery solution.
Well, nannies will now have, instead of 6 feet, well, yeah, they'll have like maybe 4 feet
They'll have
there or
4
something.
feet.
It'd be a
Yeah.
shame if there was some tactical urbanism to get rid of those bollards.
It's terrible if something happened to them. So let's keep moving on. I know we're kind of running late on time. We've got lots of questions. Commissioner Nash.
Sure, thanks. I couldn't put this in the whole chat, but I'm, happy to work on trying to change the rule or the reg that will permit businesses to expand side by side. I do want to address a point that was made earlier, though. I think the regs currently require that to get a sidewalk cafe permit, the business establishment needs to be a restaurant or, have a food service license of some type. So it wouldn't be possible for the bank, for example, to get its own sidewalk cafe permit
Right.
and then sublease it, even if subleasing were possible to another business. But what might be possible if we were to change the rule would be for a non-restaurant either side, to use the example of Nanny O'Brien's, to that they could expand into that space, based on the applicant's own restaurant license. I do want to compliment you, Ms. Vaca. I think, we've had a lot of presentations from DDOT personnel and officials, and I mean, your answers are, I think, crystal clear and complete, and I appreciate that you're trying to find a solution here. But I think ultimately the solution is going to be in changing the rule. I appreciate the work in trying to, reconfigure the sidewalk in a way that serves everyone. I would not favor narrowing the sidewalk space to as little as 6 feet. This isn't a small cafe on Ordway Street, for example. In fact, I think one of the main reasons for closing the service lane, if I recall, was because the former sidewalk was too narrow, particularly when we consider that we want this to be a more lively area and we're trying to attract patrons to the zoo and so forth. I think we're going to need that 10 feet. And beyond that, just looking at your slide, while I wouldn't object to removing the bollards, I notice now that we have tree boxes planted there. And frankly, I think there are too few places for trees and greenery now that this is a sidewalk. And so it would not only mean removing the bollards and probably the paver border there, but also the tree boxes, which I think would not be a very satisfactory solution, because what we all want to do is have this be a really attractive promenade that serves pedestrians and restaurants and visitors alike. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Cassandra?
I'm good, thanks.
Adam?
Thank you so much for coming. The commissioners were asking about moving the 10-foot path to either side of the space, and it sounds like the big issue there is that there's a few obstructions in different places that get in the way, like the planters and the bike racks and all that. I just wanted to ask, does that 10 feet clear space have to be in the same part of the promenade throughout the whole block? Like, why couldn't it say be down the center in the few places where there's obstructions, and then be on one of the sides of it in other locations, in order to have as much, you know, restaurant space as possible while keeping the 10-foot width?
Yeah, that gets towards removing meandering through the pathway, right? We want it to be clear and straight so that it's the same experience across the block. Even if you have the right amount of space or dimensions, if you're having to weave, even though it might not be business by business, but portions of the block, it makes it more challenging for the more vulnerable users to navigate it. So our standard has always been to make sure that the pathway is consistent along the entire block face.
Thank you.
Ed?
This isn't so much a question, but maybe just an ask. So first of all, thank you everybody who's been working on this. I've been really excited to see this all come together, and I appreciate all the hard work, and I am fully appreciating how complicated it is after sitting through this discussion. So thank you all. Let's talk about the bollard safety thing for a second, because that hasn't come up yet. These things are dangerous. They're really pointy. I've injured myself on them, and you might be saying, Ed, we know you injure yourself on pretty much everything. And that's true. But other people might also be injured. And I've noticed that the zoo thing is quite popular with children who walk right past this area. So as we're opening up this streetery area on the side that's close to the buildings, it's actually kind of dangerous. And I'm wondering if, to Kimberly Vaca's point earlier, the bollards do exist. I'm wondering if we could do something to nerf them for the period of time until such that there's a more final resolution. Like, we could literally put nerf on them, like a pencil eraser top or something like that. Because otherwise, like, we don't really have a streetery, basically, because we have dangerous, sharp things all throughout where we would want to be. So thank you for listening to me. That's all I had to say.
Thank you. Commissioner Nash, did you mean to still have your hand up? That's okay.
Sorry for that, all over.
No worries. Kurt?
Hi, I'm Kurt Large. I'm one of the owners of Nanny O'Brien's, and I just want to thank people for the love I've heard tonight. It's been really touching. I mean, we've been running that business for, well, we took it over for the Lyon family. The Lyon family opened it in 1994. We took it over in 2007. So my partners and I have been Mark Hanover and Jeff Dawson. But, I would just really, I think really some interesting ideas and solutions have been brought up. And just if we can be flexible, if instead of 10 feet, I was going to mention that. I'm glad it's been brought up to have 6 feet. And realize we want this space to be activated rather than just a huge, it's a 10 foot in the middle, but no one's going to be next to the buildings either. So you got 16 feet of cement, and, there are a couple of trees, I guess, have been added, but really look for a solution where you can have 6 feet is plenty of space. So we're great during the pandemic when we had, 15 or to 20 seats out there, whatever it was. And we were able to use, Jay, the sewing machine vacuum store next door. He doesn't use a space, so we used it, and we were allowed to, and it was great. So just hope that really appreciate the ideas and what people are trying to accomplish here.
Yeah, and just we're committed, and we'll keep pushing this along.
It's appreciated. Thank you.
I do want to say, as we look to potentially allowing for streetery for Nanny O'Brien's, if that's what you're interested in pursuing in the roadway, you could occupy the parking spaces adjacent to your business. So we do, while we don't allow it for sidewalk cafes, the regs that I'm writing for streeteries would allow for that. So that could even grant you more space than anyone else on the whole block.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Prinzo.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Ed's point too, because speaking as somebody who wouldn't consider themselves a vulnerable user of the space, but am severely visually impaired, especially at night, I have walked into the bollards because I don't see them, because the sidewalk itself is not extremely well lit up, and it's very painful.
It's not the first thing I've been asked to nerf on this block. Okay, any other, I don't see any other hands raised. If anybody else hasn't spoken and wanted to ask any questions, get the hand raised or speak up. Otherwise, Cassandra.
All right, last question. I am just want to confirm that we would be able to get a public space permit for a farmer's market or a pop-up market if it's only the 6 feet, because it would spill into the pedestrian path because tents are 10 by 10.
Good question.
Yeah, those are pop-up events. So those have different standards in sidewalk cafes.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other final, going once, going twice, at least for this meeting? I know we'll talk about it more, but thank you so much for everybody who came out and asked questions. Wait, Kurt, do you have one more question?
Just a quick question. Is it a pop-up possible on the weekend where the space isn't being used? And so, every weekend there's, it's considered differently.
Yeah, we, I think the best example of that, if you go to DuPont, we have streeteries and I believe it's 20th Street right next to Mission and a few other restaurants that are there all week long, except for on the weekends when the DuPont Farmers Market happens. So the businesses remove their tables and chairs and the farmers market then occupies that space. And when the market is done, the business brings back their streetery. So that could be even conditioned into any sidewalk cafe permit that exists. So that, it's something that happens throughout the public engagement process.
Great idea for game day. Okay, thank you.
Oh, I also I had a closing.
Yeah, go ahead.
And just how we got to where we are with this project. This project was started and studied back in, I believe, 2010, 2012. With the intent to gauge the community's interest in closing the service lane and turning it back into a sidewalk shared space or not, right? And it went through several iterations, a ton of community engagement. The majority of the community, until one final meeting, was totally on board with closing this down to cars and opening it to pedestrians. Because in that last meeting, there was kind of a big scare that happened there. The plans were walked back, and this is the design that we ended up with that was finalized in 2018, that it was going to be a shared space with cars and people, and that is inherently dangerous. And so it was a bit of a flawed plan when we tried to do this half and half idea. Public space is finite, and we as a community really need to get out there, and when we're planning these projects, prioritize, look at, chalk out, what do we want this space to look like? And, is it better this way or that way? Because this in-between thing, it clearly didn't work. And that's why those bollards are there, was because it was planned to be one thing. The community then saw during the pandemic, it could be something entirely just closed, and we can all live without cars using that as a parking space or parking lot. So I think there needs to be a little bit of lessons learned in this, and being more open-minded about going away from the status quo in projects like this. So I'm hoping that in the future, this is a case study and a little bit of lesson learned, and we can do better. And I also, again, want to thank Kimberly for her time and her team and all of the energy and thought put into this. I think this was a really good exchange, and I appreciate the community commissioners, everybody for coming with a solutions mindset and not just pointing out that everything's terrible, so we should just go back to having cars there. Bob, you have your hand up if you
Real
want.
quick, yeah, I was just wondering, what are the next steps for this, both to Kimberly? I mean, you've heard some ideas from our side, and then to the ANC. Are you guys going to speak on this at your February meeting? So I just didn't want to close this out without understanding what the next steps were.
Yeah, so for me, I plan to relay all of your comments and questions back to leadership, let them know how this went. I'll ask the question again, are there any other design solutions? As I mentioned, this is something we had workshopped over several months. Just making sure that this is the path forward. As I talked about tonight, if there are any changes that come out of those conversations, I will let ANC, District Bridges, I will let everybody know what that new direction is if that happens. Otherwise, it would be status quo, but I'll follow up regardless. Next steps would include each of the businesses to file a sidewalk cafe permit for the spaces that have been identified for sidewalk cafes. In TOPS, I can help with the plans and the design and making sure that it would meet our standards, whether that be via email, phone. I'm always available to talk, and then they would be approved by the Public Space Committee. I would recommend, given that this is expected to open in March, that we start that process ASAP. So the businesses on the phone or on this call, I would begin drafting those plans. So I will give you a response of my conversations with leadership ASAP.
Sounds great.
Regarding the ANC, I will be definitely testifying at a DDOT's oversight hearing, and I will be sure to include this as one of my points. And I encourage others to submit testimony into the record if you cannot do so live. That hearing is the 9th or the 14th?
Yes,
the
I think
9th.
it's the 9th.
9th. And then the record, I believe, is usually open for another week after that. And also press the mayor and the council member to free up funds in the budget for whatever it costs to get the bollards removed, right?
Yep. All right, sounds good. Thank you, everyone. I think that closes this one out. Janelle, do we have anything after this? The last one?
Nope, that was it. Again, if you want to reach out to all at ANC dot, oh, good God, it's late.
All at ANC3C.org.
To email all the commissioners, and then we'll get things across to all the committee members of this committee. Again, we sincerely appreciate everyone's time this evening. Anything else, Tammy?
Oh, enjoy your night.
Yes.
We'll keep working on it. Thank you.
I'll have to go in.
All right.
Thanks,
Have a good
everybody.